Despite such a diverse background, the Bible is unlike any other book written in history in its historical accuracy, agreement with demonstrable science and archaeology, and consistency, both internally and externally. The Bible has been translated in over 2,000 languages and ranks highest among the most widely printed and studied books in the world. What? Okay, so he starts off by saying, hey, yeah, it's totally accurate, and it's historically accurate, and it's scientifically accurate, and it has archaeology to back it up. And then, instead of giving any evidence of that, or explaining why we know that, or explaining why we think that, he just says, yeah, it's been translated into over 2,000 languages, and it's the most widely printed book in the world, which is why we can totally trust it, yeah? Those 2 points have nothing to do with each other. It's an interesting fact. It's been translated and published a lot. Okay, so has 50 Shades of Grey. Doesn't mean we should follow it word for word on how to live our lives. I mean, what's that got to do really with agreement with demonstrable science and archaeology? I thought he was saying before how, secular scientists are against God and the Bible. I mean, I'm going to need some solid examples before I just take your word for it that the Bible matches up with science and the Bible matches up with archaeology. But he just thinks he can say this statement, gloss over it and move on, because you'll just take him at face value and accept it. And I can't do that, I'm afraid. Again, it's just an unsubstantiated claim without any real evidence. And it's a shame, because these are big, interesting claims that would be quite interesting to read about and learn about, but he just, I don't know, he kind of glosses over the interesting bits, which is a shame. Next he goes on to say, the first 39 books of the Bible, the Old Testament, were solidified and used authoritatively in its complete form by the Hebrews well before the time of Christ. The books of the New Testament were written about AD 40 to AD 90 and were formally canonized into the set of 27 books we have today, sometime before the year AD 375. They were canonized by those who officially verified an assembled set of 27 books because they stood up to the measuring tests of divine inspiration and authority. So basically all this means is, hey, people have been reading the Bible for a long time, and people have been writing the Bible for a long time, and a long, long time ago some people trusted the Bible. Back in the day, before we'd uncovered a lot of evidence for how things work, and for the Earth being 4.5 billion years old, and for evolution being a thing, way, way back then, before we'd uncovered that evidence, people used a lot of these books we're talking about here to explain things that they didn't yet have an explanation for, and they didn't yet have any other evidence for. Or they used these books for rules on how to live their life and make sure they didn't die of food poisoning or killing each other, or whatever. So yeah, that totally means we can trust the Bible, right? Because thousands of years ago other people did, and it's not like society changes. No. None of this means that anything written in those books is correct, the word of God, or still relevant today. I mean, it's interesting, but it doesn't really help us or influence our life, does it? Anyway, then he goes on to talk about how the New Testament books were canonized, and it's all stuff like Peter trusted Paul and Luke and blah blah blah. And so basically he just talks about how a lot of people with the same agenda wanted other people to trust the books that said the same thing they wanted to believe, or whatever. Apparently the method for canonizing these books was these ancient councilmen sifted through false gospels and other writings that early deceivers claimed were God-inspired, so that later generations of Christians could trust, study, know, and teach and believe in the scriptures. Cool. So this, I think, is a very kind of important point, because he's actually recognizing that people can just write stuff and say, yeah, so God inspired this thing that I'm writing right now, and you have to believe what I say because I wrote it here in this thing that I wrote. He's actually recognizing that people can do that, and people have done that. And it's quite interesting. And I kind of wonder how they picked out these false gospels from the true ones. How did they know they were false? Well, he doesn't really go into that, but he does talk about how they recognize true gospels, which is a slightly different thing, but he says they looked at things like, did the text describe mythological or pointless miracles or genuine miracles, which had always accompanied and authorized a message, the gospel. But I have to ask, how can you tell these apart? He gives no actual criteria. I mean, what exactly is a genuine miracle? What exactly is a pointless miracle? Because to me, water into wine, while very fun, is kind of pointless, and so on. He goes on to say, did the people who lived through the events that the text describes reject those texts as being false or accept them as having occurred as described? And again, I kind of want to ask, what criteria did contemporaries use for rejecting or accepting a text? And just because a text was rejected at the time doesn't mean it wasn't true. A lot of scientists made claims that at the time were that's stupid, how can you believe that? And then later on we went and found evidence for, hey look, it is actually true. So again, whether or not contemporaries trusted it, I don't really think is that good a criteria, but I can kind of see why they used it. I guess looking specifically at the criteria that those societies and those groups of people and whatever they used, was it kind of a thing where those people in those societies were well, we like this rule and we don't like this rule, so we'll ignore this book? Or was it more we trust this author and not this author? Or was there some peer review process? I know, I personally would just like a little more detail, a little more explanation, a little more evidence before I trust this point. I'm not saying I reject this point, I'm just saying I don't trust this point. Do you know what I mean? There's a difference. Next up he writes, did the text contain any logical or biblical contradictions? If so, it must not have come from the same divine co-author who is not a god of confusion but order, and who is passionate about clearly revealing who he is to as many as will listen. Yeah, because the current canonized Bible has 0 contradictions, doesn't it? But let's not get into those right now. Daniel goes on to write, was the text written by an apostle or one of the authorized apostles? I really hope I'm saying that right. Apostle. Is that how you say it? Or apostle? Apostle? Okay, I'm shutting it now. So basically all this point means is, was the book written by someone with the same bias/agenda or authorized by someone with the same bias/agenda? It's basically, hey, are we all on the same team here? Because we can't have people who oppose us writing in the same book as us. Do you know what I mean? It's like Ken Ham wouldn't let Bill Nye write a chapter in an Answers in Genesis book, would he? Exactly the same thing. Anyway, after giving us this brief history with no real, sources or evidence, Daniel says, let's put the Bible through some tests that historians use when analysing the historical accuracy and reliability of ancient manuscripts. Now this sounds really good to me. I'm personally no historian, and I definitely don't have training in dealing with ancient manuscripts. You know what I did do? GCSE history. And anyone in the UK who did GCSE history knows that the source questions were a huge part of those exam papers. It was all about assessing the reliability of a source. Can we trust this? Can we not? What are the good things? What are the bad things? So I know some of the very, very basic things to ask in, finding out whether a historical source is accurate and reliable, right? I know a few of the basic things, but I'm sure that Daniel, being Daniel and being so well educated and informed, is going to be asking all of these questions and more, obviously, and answering them because he's that good an author, isn't he? I actually made a list of some of the kind of reliability questions I'd like to put forward. So for each of the authors of the Bible, how do we know they actually wrote their sections? Why did they write them? Were they biased in any way? Were they asked to write them for some reason? Did they personally get anything out of writing it, whether it be money or status or some kind of other reward? Who were they writing it for? What was their target audience? Who read it at the time and for what purpose? When and where was it written? How do we know this? Would they have any reason to be untruthful or lie or exaggerate at all? What independent corroborating evidence do we have to back up any of the facts or events mentioned in each part of the text? What was the historical, social and political context at the time of writing? And does this alter the meaning or affect the purpose for writing at all? If it's a retelling of past events, then did the authors experience them firsthand or not? Did they hear the stories from someone else? Did it happen to them? Did they see it happen? How much time passed between the event happening and the time of writing? Did anything change or get lost in translation? And so on and so on. They're just a brief list of questions that I have regarding this, historical accuracy of the Bible. So let's see if Daniel wants to address all of these important questions. He writes, first, let's evaluate whether what we have today matches what was written originally. In the Bible's case, this was about 2,000 years ago and earlier. Second, do the recorded events describe the true events? Let's see how the Bible holds up for each of these important questions. It's not really asking that much, is he? It's 2 things. So he's missing a lot of important things in regards to, actually assessing if the Bible's reliable. But at least the 2 things he does ask should be pretty useful. So let's read on and see what he has to say on this matter.